Hello, everybody, and welcome to the session number 2 of visual literacy, where I will be talking about film in language teaching and literacy teaching. In previous session, we were talking about visual images, and on this occasion, we are talking about films. And films undergo the category of visual literacy because they represent like very vivid and dynamic way of how you can teach children to read the images and to be emotionally involved in what they're doing. On this occasion, I would like to show you how film is normally used in media literacy and what are the elements of culture that we can recognize in films. And of course, I'm here talking about English speaking films, as well as showing you some basic techniques that you as teachers need to be aware of when using films for teaching in general. And media literacy has got a lot of attention over the last 10-15 years, and this is because educational systems around the world wanted to create a system where children become critical readers, not just of text as we know it traditionally, like in books or words, but also being able to read images. And in Scandinavia, in particular in Denmark, a lot of attention has been paid to providing and creating materials to schools to employ film and generally like animations, TV programs in teaching, and not just in English, but across curricular subject. So let's have a look at what films can help us with in language teaching. When we are talking about films as part of visual literacy, we consider, didactically speaking, film as a kind of visual text. And film is an excellent medium for teaching, reading for teaching literacy, because films allow for predictions, for responding to certain scenes, to certain characters. They can also enable pupils to question certain beliefs, values, and characters in the film. Film teaching is usually used in the classroom as an outset for writing. It is also used as a springboard for teaching critical thinking, and films are once again a great medium for all students, and they're especially helpful and useful for those pupils who are weaker, who don't have such good reading skills, and it is an excellent medium to motivate and to activate pupils in the classroom. Apart from teaching the actual language, children are emotionally, in a way, involved with characters, with scenes, with the drama that is taking place in films. Talking about films as a genre, in the articles that I have provided on It's Learning, we are not talking only about films as we know it in like the traditional form, like films that you can see on Netflix or in cinema, but is a rather broad category that encompasses both very short animations, then animated films or like cartoons, such as, for example, Cinderella or Peter Pan or Little Mermaid, all those movies that are produced for children primarily, like Disney movies, then some computer animations, TV programs that are also appropriate for children audiences. All of these are considered to be a sort of a film. And films are used in language classrooms, both in international schools and in Danish schools. In Denmark, there is a very, very long tradition for using films in teaching. And for this one, like an institution that is primarily responsible for distribution of pedagogic and didactic materials for using film in the classroom is called the Danish Film Institute. And they have a department that is called Filmcentralen, where they produce the consultants and people who know a lot about use of film for educational purposes. They produce special didactic materials that accompany films, and each school in Denmark has access to this huge database that is financed by the Danish government or by the state. In international schools, film is used, of course, as part of media literacy, and that is a huge part of English language teaching. So in addition to libraries and books and other materials, media productions are considered to be an invaluable tool for teaching reading and writing and speaking skills as well. So what are now the cultural elements of films? Because in this particular session we are actually looking at culture. And just like we did with literature, with visual images, with drama, for example, and other aesthetic forms, films contain a lot of elements that can enable us to learn a lot about the English-speaking countries' cultures. So the first one, you can see here there is a very long list, and the first one is definitely the actual, like the English language itself. With young learners, of course, you would select some very short films, some very short TV programs that are lasting for about 3, 4, like 5 minutes, containing very little language, a lot of facial expressions, body language, and so on. Whereas for older learners, you could, as a teacher, include both the language but also other elements to be analyzed. And some of these elements that are very interesting for analysis, that can tell us a lot about the culture of the English-speaking world, are, for example, pragmatic competence. Then films can tell us a lot about everyday living in the English-speaking countries, starting from the basic things like food, drink, working hours, leisure activities, and so on. Living conditions as well, like how people, for example, in New York live in different communities depending maybe on their race and their social status, wealth, and so on. A lot about interpersonal relations and how language is connected to interpersonal relations, to class, values, beliefs, and attitudes on the English-speaking world. In Denmark, that's particularly like the database that can be found on this Filmcentralen is usually from countries such as the UK, the United States, and Australia. These are like the three huge countries that have produced a lot of these short films that are very much relevant for culture teaching. We can also look at body language, ritual behavior. We can go in further and look at some of the ecological aspects, environment, for example, and socioeconomic aspects. And I would say that when it comes to the Danish system, usually with young learners, with like beginning stages of using film in English language teaching, there is a lot of focus on the actual language teaching and using films to teach the actual language. Whereas as you progress with language teaching and with like the higher levels, after pupils have formed a certain base, like vocabulary base, then they move on to more abstract usage of films. So, for example, when they come, when pupils come to the seventh, like eighth, ninth grade, this is the part of education that is called udskoling. This is like the finishing part of primary education in Denmark. Then films are used here actually to teach children about some quite serious topics, such as teen problems and dilemmas. These include, for example, alcoholism, teenage pregnancy, drug abuse, bullying, talking about poverty and unequal wealth distribution, and so on. So, some of these a little bit more critical themes that also, among other things, characterize the English speaking countries. And this is something that sometimes to international students and like people who come from abroad, this comes as a surprise, because normally, like when we are talking about children, we as adults, of course, we want to protect them, and in a lot of countries, this protection is also like protecting children from some sensitive issues. Whereas here in like Danish schools, especially with what they call like store elever, or like older children, teachers are not reluctant to take up these critical and sensitive issues. And the way this is usually done is by presenting children with these serious topics through films, through some sort of animated materials. So to sort of sum up this part, once again, with young learners, teachers here in Denmark usually start with materials such as animated films, such as cartoons, quite innocent topics, something, like YouTube videos, or some bloggers, like child bloggers and vloggers. And as children progress and move towards adolescence, the seriousness of topics becomes a little bit more accentuated. So, what are the sources of film for teaching? Because as a teacher, we always need to have didactic purpose when we select a film, and you as a teacher need to be aware of the appropriateness of the film for a certain age. The first thing that we need to take into account is the actual length of the film and how much time you have available for that in school, like in your teaching plan, in the course that you're teaching. And you'll see this once you start working in collaboration with your colleagues. You will figure this out. This is not something that I can tell you now beforehand while you're a student. But one thing is certain is that you can either work with the entire film, like lasting more than 1 hour. This is quite rare. Normally, for didactic purposes, you would either work with a short film, short animation for younger children, like approximately 5 minutes, and with older students, 10 to 15, maybe 20 minutes, so that you can incorporate film within one average lesson of, let's say, 45 minutes. Unless, of course, the school is working with a really serious theme and there is place for playing a whole movie. Sometimes in pedagogy, this is also looked down to by researchers because it designates a so-called lazy teacher. So your job as a teacher is not just to play a movie to children and that's it. We have used a film at school. No, this is not the way it works in the school context. The way it works in school context is that you select as a teacher appropriate film, you link it to the theme that you're working on, and you select some snapshots, you select parts of the film, some scenes, but even just a couple of shots are sometimes enough to analyze, and then you produce some sort of didactic material, usually in the forms of questions where students will be allowed to analyze the film. In Denmark, the primary source of film material for school usage is the so-called Filmcentralen, which is a department of the Danish Film Institute. I have provided the link to that. Unfortunately, due to technical requirements, we cannot access the films at the moment. We would need to be on the campus, but I have attached this link. I would advise you to save it because once you start working, schools usually have access to this portal. And the good thing about Filmcentralen is that they usually have films that are accompanied by some sort of didactic materials for you as teachers. They also did the selection of films, and on this portal you can find films for any subject taught in Danish schools. Then we have another source where there are like thousands and thousands of clips, TV programs, short films, whole films, and so on. That is again on our campus, Center for Teaching Aids. It is part of our library. Again, I have unsuccessfully tried to reserve some materials for you. But again, due to technical requirements, I'm not able to share these with you, and therefore I had to improvise a little bit. Then I have provided a lot of sources of didactic materials and ideas for teaching on its learning. Once again, short films are appropriate for school use. It is very, very rare that you would teach the whole film. Usually you don't have so much time within the curriculum that allows for watching a full movie during school day. And for young learners, a lot of cartoons and animations, and usually short or TV films for older children. And for older children, for teenage audience, usually the films that are selected by schools are those that in a way feature teen characters, revolve around some problems that teenagers have, some dilemmas that they have, and media literacy has become such an important part of language teaching in general and literacy that every school has their own sources of films for teaching. What I would advise you to do is, if you once you finish university, don't stay in Denmark or don't work in the Danish system, I would advise you to inquire in school about their sources, or to suggest to them some sources. I have also attached on its learning some links to, for example, American organizations that are working with media literacy, and in these links you'll find thousands and thousands of resources that you can use. I will stop now the recording, and in the next part I will be talking about the basic elements that you as a teacher and that your pupils need to understand when watching a film in order to be able to